The first guard appeared only seconds later, rounding a corner 20 meters ahead, boots scraping on the metal walkway bolted into the rock. She pressed flat against the stone and let him pass, his rifle swaying lazily, his attention fixed somewhere beyond. He wore the black-gray armor of the Dominion militia, helmet down, face hidden, but she could see the faint scar of paint across his chest plate, a tally of kills or missions she couldn't be sure. As he passed, she reached down silently, unhooked the compact blade strapped to her thigh, and slid from the shadows with a speed that belied the pain in her bruised ribs. Her hand covered his mouth just as the blade slipped beneath his helmet seam, a quick, precise motion that ended him before he could make a sound. She dragged his body behind the jutting rock and knelt, studying him. Nothing unusual, standard gear, no markings that would reveal who commanded him, but his comm unit was still active. She pried it free, attached it to her ear, and immediately picked up the low chatter of the guards. Their voices were distorted but clear enough. Routine status updates, casual complaints about the cold night, no sign they had noticed anything out of place. Perfect. She slipped into the shadows again, her eyes fixed on the narrow entry point to the fortress below. The rappel had taken her halfway down the canyon, but the stronghold itself stretched deeper, its main gate carved into the base where the canyon floor flattened into a platform. She couldn't go through the gate, it was too heavily fortified. Instead, she traced the cliff wall with her eyes until she spotted a narrow ventilation shaft, its faint trail of exhaust smoke curling into the night. It was high enough to reach with some climbing, but just wide enough for her slender frame to slip through if she removed some of her heavier gear. It would be a tight, suffocating crawl, but it offered the best chance of getting inside undetected. She made her way across the narrow walkway, each step careful, her body pressed against the wall as she moved from shadow to shadow. Twice she had to stop, holding her breath as patrols passed, their rifles tapping lightly against their armor as they walked. The tension was constant, every nerve stretched taut, but it fueled her. Every close call reminded her of what was at stake. She didn't just want to destroy the jammer anymore. She wanted answers, why her parachute had been sabotaged, who in her own chain of command had marked her for death. When she reached the base of the ventilation shaft, she secured her rope again, driving a piton deep into the stone to anchor it. The climb was slow, painful on her battered ribs, but she forced herself upward, fingers gripping the narrow seams in the rock, boots finding purchase where she could. At the shaft's edge she pulled a compact cutter from her pack, a tool no larger than a pen, and sliced through the mesh cover with a soft hiss. The metal curled inward and she slipped inside, dragging the mesh back into place behind her. The shaft was narrow, her body scraping along the sides as she crawled, the sound of her movements drowned beneath the distant hum of machinery. The air was thick with the smell of oil and dust, each breath shallow. She moved inch by inch, her arms pulling, knees pushing, until the shaft widened slightly and she could peer through a grated opening into the fortress interior. Below her stretched a dimly lit corridor, patrols moving back and forth, their armor clinking faintly. Beyond that, she could see the faint glow of consoles, the jammer control room just as Intel had described. She counted 3 guards inside, another 2 patrolling the hallway. That was manageable. But the jammer itself was larger than she had expected, a massive array of panels and conduits that pulsed with a low hum. It wasn't something she could disable quickly with a single charge. She would need to rig it carefully, set her charges in a pattern that would collapse the system completely. That meant time, and time meant risk. She drew back from the grate, weighing her options. The crawl space connected to multiple vents, and she spotted one that led closer to the control room ceiling. If she could drop silently from above, she could take them out before they raised an alarm. It would be brutal, close-quarters work, but she had trained for worse. She pulled herself toward the vent, every movement deliberate, her body aching from the scrape of metal on skin. When she reached the grate above the control room, she paused, listening. The guards were relaxed, talking quietly, oblivious. She slipped her blade into the grate's edge and pried it loose, catching it before it could fall. Then she coiled her rope around a vent strut, secured it, and lowered herself silently into the room. Her boots touched the ground with barely a whisper, but one of the guards turned anyway, sensing something. She moved faster than his brain could register. The blade flashed, cutting across his throat as her other hand yanked his rifle away. The sound of his collapse alerted the others, but by then she was already in motion, diving forward, striking the second guard in the throat with the butt of the rifle, spinning to fire a suppressed shot into the third. The room filled with chaos for only a moment, then silence returned, broken only by the hum of the jammer. She stood among the fallen, breathing hard, blood pumping like fire through her veins. Without hesitation, she pulled the compact charges from her pack and began placing them along the jammer's conduits. Each charge beeped softly as she armed it, the red lights winking in the dim glow. She worked quickly, methodically, but part of her mind remained elsewhere, on the parachute, on the betrayal. She couldn't let herself think too long, not yet, but the anger was there, a low burning flame beneath her calm exterior. Whoever had set her up hadn't expected her to make it this far. That thought made her lips curl into a faint, grim smile. She always had a habit of defying expectations. She was nearly finished when the comm unit she had stolen crackled suddenly in her ear. A voice, sharper, colder than the casual guard chatter she had heard before. Report. Outer perimeter sweep is late. Status. Silence followed, the voice demanding a response from the guard she had killed earlier. She didn't answer, keeping perfectly still. After a moment, the voice repeated, more urgent. Report, soldier. Identify. Again silence. She knew what that meant. They would send someone to check in soon. She armed the last charge, set the timer, and slipped back toward the vent, moving fast, not bothering with subtlety now. The room would be gone in less than 3 minutes. As she hauled herself back into the vent, the door below burst open. She heard boots storming into the control room, shouts of alarm, the crackle of comms calling reinforcements. She didn't look back. She crawled through the shaft as quickly as her battered body allowed, the sound of chaos building below. A minute later the explosion tore through the fortress, a thunderous roar that shook the very walls. Fire and smoke belched into the vent, heat searing her back as she scrambled forward, teeth gritted. The blast had worked. She could hear the sudden cut of static across the comms, the jammer silenced. The main assault force would now move in. But for her the mission wasn't over. She emerged from the vent into another corridor, coughing from the smoke, and pressed herself against the wall. The fortress was alive now with alarms, red lights flashing, guards rushing in all directions. Perfect cover for someone like her. She tightened her grip on her blade and rifle, eyes cold, her next move clear. She wasn't just escaping. She was going deeper into the heart of the fortress. Somewhere down here lay the answers about the sabotage, and she intended to carve them out with her own hands. The fortress was chaos now. Smoke poured from ruptured corridors, alarms blared in shrill unison, and red emergency lights painted the walls in a hellish glow. To Alara it was opportunity. While soldiers scrambled to contain the fires and secure breaches, she moved through the confusion like a shadow, slipping between patrols, striking when necessary, vanishing again before reinforcements could converge. Her body ached with every motion, bruises screaming from her brutal landing earlier, but she welcomed the pain. It kept her sharp, awake, alive. Her blade had already tasted more than one throat since leaving the vent, and her stolen rifle coughed quietly with suppressed shots when distance forced her hand. Each body she left behind was hidden as best she could manage in the rush, though she knew eventually they would discover the pattern of silent deaths trailing through their fortress. But by then she would be deeper, closer to the truth. As she pressed deeper into the corridors, the architecture shifted. The crude metal of militia construction gave way to older stone, polished smooth by hands long dead. The Dominion hadn't just built a fortress here, they had unearthed one. The deeper she went, the more she recognized the signs of ancient work, inscriptions carved into walls, faint symbols that glowed faintly beneath the red emergency light. She slowed, brushing her hand along one of the symbols. It thrummed faintly under her glove, almost alive, though she couldn't decipher its meaning. Whatever this place had been before, it wasn't just a canyon outpost. It was something older, something powerful. And that explained why the Dominion had dug into it like scavengers. But none of that mattered to her immediate mission. Answers about ancient civilizations would have to wait. Her focus was on the sabotage. Somewhere here was the thread that tied her betrayal to this stronghold. The comm unit in her ear crackled again, voices barking orders. They had realized the jammer was gone, and panic bled into their tone. Secure the inner sanctum, one voice ordered. Do not let her reach the chamber. Kill her if you must. The words froze Alara in her tracks. The chamber. The way they spoke, it wasn't just a defensive order, it was fear. She could hear it even through the distortion of their comms. They weren't afraid of her. They were afraid of what she might find. Her jaw tightened and her path became clear. If they wanted her away from the chamber, then that was exactly where she needed to go. She adjusted the rifle on her shoulder and moved with renewed purpose. The resistance grew thicker as she descended further. Groups of soldiers worked in pairs now, sweeping the corridors more carefully, voices sharp with tension. She couldn't ghost through all of them anymore. The fights became harder, closer, bloodier. In one narrow hall, she was forced into a desperate grapple with a towering guard who caught her by the arm. He slammed her into the wall, his gauntlet fist driving toward her face, but she twisted, dragged his arm down, and drove her blade under his ribs, angling up to pierce his heart. His weight collapsed on her, pinning her against the wall until she shoved him off, breath ragged, chest burning. She could feel her strength thinning, each battle draining more than she could afford. But retreat was not an option. She pushed on, boots leaving smears of blood on the stone floor as she advanced. The chamber wasn't on any map she had studied. The fortress blueprints she had memorized didn't show this deep. But the voices over comms gave her hints, coordinates, checkpoints, frantic updates as they rushed to seal her path. She listened, piecing together their panic into a trail. At last, after winding through another stone passage carved with ancient glyphs, she saw it. A massive set of doors at the corridor's end, reinforced with steel bands but still undeniably ancient. 2 guards stood before it, rifles ready, eyes scanning nervously. She dropped into cover behind a broken section of wall, assessing. A frontal assault would be suicide. Her rifle only had a handful of rounds left, and she doubted the doors would give her much time before reinforcements arrived. But the ceiling above was cracked, crumbling stone that her earlier explosion had likely weakened. She spotted a narrow fissure she could climb. Dangerous, unstable, but it might let her drop down on them. She scaled the wall quickly, ignoring the fresh sting of reopened wounds, fingers digging into the stone. Dust showered down with each grip, threatening to give her away, but the guards remained oblivious. When she reached the fissure, she wedged herself inside, pulling her body through with agonizing effort. She crawled across the ceiling beam, steadying her breathing, then dropped. Her boots hit the first guard squarely, driving him down hard, her blade slashing across the second's throat before his rifle could rise. Both men were dead before their cries could echo. She wasted no time, dragging their bodies aside and turning her attention to the doors. The lock was electronic, Dominion tech plastered crudely over ancient stone. She ripped a code breaker from her pack, slapped it onto the console and waited. Lights blinked, circuits hissed, and the heavy doors shuddered as the mechanism disengaged. They groaned open slowly, revealing a chamber bathed in a cold, pale light. Ilara stepped inside cautiously, rifle raised, eyes narrowing as she took in the sight. The room was vast, circular, with walls covered in inscriptions that pulsed faintly, alive with power. At its center stood a raised platform, and on it, a console unlike any Dominion tech she had ever seen. It wasn't built, it had grown, crystalline and organic, glowing softly with an inner light. And standing before it was a figure she hadn't expected. Not a Dominion soldier, not an officer, but a man in the uniform of her own command. His back was to her at first, his hands moving across the console as though manipulating it. When he turned, her blood ran cold. "Colonel Rin," she breathed, voice low with disbelief. He was supposed to be light years away, stationed at Central Command. Yet here he was, calm, collected, as though her arrival had been expected all along. His lips curled into a thin smile. "Captain Vey. Remarkable. You actually survived." His tone was casual, almost mocking, but his eyes gleamed with something sharper, curiosity, perhaps even respect. Her grip on the rifle tightened, finger hovering near the trigger. "You sabotaged my shoot." It wasn't a question. The way he smiled confirmed it. He didn't even try to deny it. "Of course," he said simply. "The mission parameters required absolute deniability. You were never meant to make it here alive. But I underestimated you." He gestured lightly at the glowing console behind him. "And now here you are, standing in the one place you should never have seen." Her breath was steady but rage burned beneath it. "What? Why betray your own soldier?" "Not betrayal," he corrected smoothly. "Correction. The Dominion isn't our true enemy, Ilara. They're just caretakers of this place. What lies beneath this chamber? That is what matters. That is what command fears. You were sent here as a test to see if a soldier could breach this stronghold. Your survival proves it. And now," his smile deepened, cold and final. "Now I can't allow you to leave." The words hung between them, sharp as blades. She leveled her rifle, eyes locked on his. Her heart hammered, not from fear but from clarity. At last she had her answer. The sabotage, the mission, the fortress, it had all been a setup. And the man who orchestrated it stood before her, calm as a serpent in its nest. She had come here for destruction, but now she carried something else. Vengeance. For a long moment, silence filled the chamber, broken only by the low hum of the crystalline console. Ilara's rifle stayed fixed on Rin's chest, her finger brushing the trigger, every muscle tight with anticipation. He stood without flinching, hands folded neatly behind his back, like a man reviewing a subordinate's report rather than facing down the barrel of a weapon. His calm infuriated her more than any shouted threat could have. She had bled, clawed, and carved her way through his labyrinth of death, only to discover the mastermind wore the same uniform as her own. The betrayal stung sharper than any wound she'd suffered that night. "You should be thanking me," Rin said finally, his voice smooth, almost persuasive. "Had you jumped with a functional parachute, the Dominion would have intercepted you long before you reached this chamber. Their net is tight. I spared you the indignity of capture." Her jaw tightened, rage burning in her chest. "You sabotaged me to kill me." "I removed you from the equation," he corrected, his tone coldly precise. "A single expendable asset sacrificed so the greater truth could be preserved. Do you think command tells you everything, Captain? Do you think your missions are about tactics and territory? No. They are about this." He turned slightly, gesturing to the glowing console. The crystalline structure pulsed faintly, its inner light shifting like a heartbeat. "This world was once a cradle of something greater than we can comprehend. The Dominion unearthed fragments, but they don't understand its true potential. Command does, and they fear it. That is why they sent you here, so when the jammers fell and this fortress collapsed, no one would ever discover the truth." Ilara's teeth clenched as she processed his words. A part of her wanted to dismiss them as the lies of a traitor, but another part, the instinct that had carried her through impossible odds, whispered that there was truth in his madness. The inscriptions, the strange living glow of the console, it was no ordinary technology. Something ancient, something alive resonated in this chamber. "And you?" she asked, voice low but steady. "What do you want, Rin? Power?" "Not power," he said, stepping closer, his eyes gleaming in the crystalline light. "Control. Imagine what a weapon like this could mean. One console, one system able to reshape battlefields, perhaps even mines. Command would bury it, the Dominion would misuse it, but I would wield it." His voice sharpened with fervor. "With this, we could end the endless wars, Captain. One will. One command. Humanity unified under a single purpose." Her stomach turned. She had heard zealotry before, from enemies, from fanatics, but to hear it in the voice of her superior officer chilled her deeper than the canyon winds ever had. He believed every word, and that made him far more dangerous than any Dominion soldier. "You're insane," she said flatly. "And you've already lost." Her finger began to tighten on the trigger, her body tensed to fire. The console pulsed suddenly, flaring bright enough to cast shadows against the far walls. A low vibration shook the chamber floor, a sound like stone grinding against stone. Rin smiled faintly, almost pitying. "No, Captain. I've only just begun." His hand brushed the console surface, and it responded instantly, its crystalline panels shifting, rearranging like living shards of glass. The hum deepened, resonating through her bones. She fired. The shot cracked through the chamber, her rifle kicking against her shoulder. The round struck his chest, then ricocheted harmlessly, deflected by a sudden shimmer of light that bloomed around him. A shield. Dominion? No, the console. The air between them shimmered faintly, bending light, an energy field tied directly to the crystalline structure. Rin hadn't just activated it, he had bound himself to it. Ilara's eyes narrowed. She fired again, then again, but each round sparked uselessly against the shield. Rin tilted his head, still calm. "You see now, don't you? This isn't metal or circuitry or anything you've known. This is alive. It chooses. And it has chosen me." He raised his hand and the console responded like a predator awakened. Shards of light tore free, coalescing into jagged spears of energy that shot across the room toward her. She dove sideways, the blast carving molten scars across the stone where she had stood. Rolling hard, she came up behind one of the fallen guards' bodies, using it as a shield as another spear slammed into it, sizzling the armor to slag. The smell of scorched metal and flesh filled her lungs as she forced herself to move, sprinting along the chamber's edge. Her rifle was useless. Her blade too short. The console's shield protected him from every attack. But Ilara wasn't the kind to stop at impossible odds. She scanned the chamber as she ran, noting the conduits of crystalline energy stretching from the central platform into the walls. The shield wasn't invincible, it was being powered, fed. If she could sever the conduits, she might bring it down. She dropped the rifle, pulling a charge from her pack instead. A small one designed for sabotage, but it would have to do. She slid into cover behind a stone pillar, armed the charge and flung it toward one of the conduits glowing along the wall. The explosion was sharp, controlled, but enough to shatter the crystalline vein. The shield around Rin flickered. He snarled, his calm cracking for the first time. "You think you can fight what you don't understand?" His voice echoed unnaturally, amplified by the console. The shards of energy reformed, dozens now, streaking toward her. She sprinted, zigzagging, heat searing her back as blasts narrowly missed. Stone crumbled, inscriptions burning away under the onslaught. She dove behind another pillar, gasping for air, sweat stinging her eyes. Her body screamed at her to stop, but she forced herself onward. She had faced death before. She had faced betrayal. But never both entwined like this. Another conduit glowed faintly across the chamber, pulsing with energy. She moved low, fast, every step agony, and armed her second charge. This time she planted it by hand, pressing it against the crystalline surface, then dove away as it detonated. The wall cracked, shards raining down, and the shield flickered harder, momentarily collapsing in a ripple. Rin staggered, his expression twisted in fury. "You don't understand, Captain," he roared, his voice booming with unnatural resonance. "I'm the only one who can control it. Without me it will consume everything." "Then maybe it should," she spat back, dragging herself to her feet, blade in hand. The shield shimmered back into place, weaker now but still active. The console pulsed erratically, its glow no longer steady but jagged, violent, as though her sabotage had wounded it. Rin raised his hand again, but the shards that formed this time trembled, unstable. He grimaced, sweat beading on his forehead. For the first time she saw doubt flash in his eyes. Elara pressed the advantage. She sprinted across the chamber, every muscle burning, diving and rolling to avoid the unstable shards that shattered stone around her. She reached another conduit, armed her final charge and slammed it into place. The explosion ripped through the wall, and this time the shield collapsed entirely, shards of light shattering into nothingness. Rin staggered, clutching his chest as though a piece of him had been torn away. Her blade flashed as she closed the distance, steel meeting flesh in a brutal arc. He caught her wrist, strength surprising for a man his age, the two of them locked in a desperate struggle. His other hand shot up, fingers glowing with residual energy from the console, searing her shoulder with raw power. She cried out, pain flooding her nerves, but she twisted, using the momentum of her agony to drive her knee into his ribs. He buckled slightly, grip loosening, and she shoved the blade forward. It sank deep, sliding under his ribs, piercing his heart. His eyes went wide, shock breaking through the mask of control. "You fool," he rasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "Without me, it will." His words faded as she twisted the blade, driving it deeper until his body went limp. She shoved him back, his body collapsing to the chamber floor. The console roared in response. Its glow flared violently, shards of crystal erupting, the entire chamber trembling as though in rage. The conduits she had severed pulsed erratically, energy surging uncontrolled. Whatever Rin had awakened was unraveling without his focus. The ground cracked beneath her boots, dust raining from the ceiling. She stumbled, clutching her seared shoulder, staring at the console as its once beautiful glow warped into something monstrous. For a brief moment she thought of leaving, of escaping the collapsing chamber. But then she remembered the words Rin had spoken, the zeal in his eyes. One will. One command. If this thing survived, someone else would try to wield it. Someone else would kill for it. The mission wasn't just about the jammer anymore. It was about ensuring this ancient weapon never fell into another's hands. Her gaze hardened. She tore the last remaining charge from her belt, smaller, weaker, not meant for something this size, but it was all she had left. She sprinted for the console as the chamber collapsed around her, shards of crystal lashing the air like whips, stone crumbling into the abyss. She vaulted onto the platform, slammed the charge into the console's core and set the timer. 30 seconds. Not long enough to escape, but long enough to finish what she started. She turned and ran, every muscle screaming, the timer beeping faintly behind her. The chamber shook violently, ceiling collapsing in chunks. She dove through the doorway just as the console erupted in a blinding flash. The shockwave hurled her forward, slamming her into the corridor wall. Pain engulfed her, ears ringing, vision white. And then silence. When her senses returned, the chamber behind her was gone, collapsed into a smoldering crater. The glow of the console was extinguished. Rin's dream of control, his betrayal, the ancient weapon, all buried in ruin. Elara pushed herself up on trembling arms, bloodied, broken, but alive. She had ended it. Alone, The night pressed down on her like a weight, thick and heavy, but Sarah's breathing was steady as she crouched near the edge of the compound. The rappelling rope was coiled at her hip, and the enemy gear she wore, scavenged during her infiltration, gave her the disguise she needed, though it sat uncomfortably against her skin. The stolen rifle in her hands had the scratches and dents of a weapon used for years, and she knew anyone who looked too closely might realize she wasn't one of them. But she wasn't here to blend in forever. She was here to strike, to finish the mission her team had entrusted to her, even though most of that team would never see another dawn. Their parachutes had been sabotaged, their lives cut short before they could hit the ground, and only she had fought against the fall. Only she had refused to surrender to death. That thought lit a fire in her chest that refused to dim. She moved silently across the gravel, her boots crunching in a rhythm no different than the guards she passed. She had studied them, memorized their movements. There was no room for hesitation now. Ahead loomed a concrete bunker, squat and ugly, its walls lined with barbed wire and steel plates. Inside, according to the intel she still had etched into her mind, was the communications hub, an array of servers and encrypted transmitters the enemy used to coordinate operations across the entire region. Taking it down would fracture their network, leave their chain of command broken. It was the kind of strike that could shift momentum in the war. It was also heavily guarded, the kind of target designed to repel even a full-strike team. But Sarah wasn't a team. She was just one woman carrying the memory of her fallen comrades. A guard rounded the corner, his eyes sharp, his hand brushing the strap of his rifle as if ready to raise it at the faintest hint of wrongness. Sarah slowed her stride, adjusted the rifle on her own shoulder, and let her gaze harden with the same weary arrogance she had seen in the enemy soldiers. She gave him the briefest nod, the kind that passed between men who had stood too many hours on watch. He hesitated, his eyes flicking to her gear, and for a moment her pulse kicked in her throat like a trapped bird. Then he moved on. She let out a slow breath only when his back was turned, though her steps never faltered. She had passed another test. At the rear of the bunker, the shadows thickened and she melted into them. There was a maintenance hatch here, small, locked but less visible than the main entrances. Her fingers worked quickly, a set of thin tools slipping from a pouch hidden inside her jacket. The enemy had reinforced the lock, but Sarah's determination outlasted metal. The click of tumblers releasing was soft, but to her ears it sounded like the crack of thunder. She eased the hatch open, slid inside and pulled it closed behind her. Darkness swallowed her, the kind that pressed tight against her eyes and lungs. She crouched, waiting, listening. The hum of electricity throbbed through the bunker's belly, a mechanical heartbeat. Somewhere above her, boots thudded against steel floors, voices muttered in a language she only half understood, and radios crackled with coded chatter. She pulled a small light from her belt, shielded its glow with her hand and scanned the narrow crawlspace. Pipes snaked along the walls, condensation dripping down them. The path was tight, forcing her to crawl on elbows and knees, the rifle dragging against the floor. Her breath came ragged, each exhale fogging in the stale air, but she didn't stop. Minutes stretched like hours until she reached the grate at the end of the crawlspace. Through it she could see the heart of the bunker, rows of servers blinking with cold lights, wires twisting like veins across the floor, and in the center, a tall console manned by two uniformed officers. Their faces were illuminated by screens filled with data and maps. They were focused, unaware of the predator in the shadows watching them. Sarah's hand tightened on her rifle. One wrong move and alarms would flood the compound with soldiers. But she couldn't take the whole place down from here. She needed to move deeper, reach the console itself, plant the charges she carried in her pack. That was the mission. Destroy the nerve center, cripple the enemy, and survive if she could. She unscrewed the grate, every turn a scream in her ears. She froze at each sound above, but no alarm came. Finally, it slid free and she eased onto the floor, her boots silent on the wires. She moved like smoke, drifting between the rows of machines, keeping her body low and her weapon ready. Her pulse thundered, but her hands were steady. She reached the base of the console and unzipped her pack with deliberate slowness. The charges gleamed faintly in the screen light, small but powerful, each one capable of ripping through steel and circuitry. She began to place them, sliding them into hidden crevices, setting timers with quick flicks of her fingers. 10 minutes. That was all the time she'd have once she activated them. A voice rang out suddenly, sharp, suspicious. Sarah's muscles locked. One of the officers had turned, his eyes narrowing at the silhouette he saw between the servers. He shouted something, his hand darting for the pistol at his belt. Sarah didn't think. Training and instinct took over. She rose, aimed, and fired. The shot cracked through the bunker, a thunderclap that shattered the hum of machines. The officer fell, his body jerking before collapsing across the console. The other officer lunged, shouting, and Sarah swung her rifle again. Another shot, another fall. Silence rushed back, thicker than before, broken only by the echo of her shots ringing in her skull. She knew the silence wouldn't last. The sound would draw guards, maybe the entire compound. Her fingers flew faster over the timers, activating the sequence. The charges began their deadly countdown, tiny red lights winking like the eyes of demons in the dark. She slung her pack back over her shoulders, sprinting toward the opposite door. Her boots pounded against steel now, no longer careful, only urgent. The hallway beyond was already alive with shouts, the pounding of boots, the clatter of weapons being raised. She turned a corner and nearly slammed into a trio of soldiers. She didn't hesitate. The rifle bucked in her hands, muzzle flashing, bodies falling. She leapt over them, sprinting harder, her breath ragged in her throat. Behind her, alarms screamed into life, red lights strobing across the walls. The compound was waking, furious and afraid. She burst through another hatch and out into the night air, gulping the cold like water. Her rope was still waiting, anchored to the rooftop where she had entered. She grabbed it, clipped her harness, and rappelled down the side as bullets snapped through the air around her. Sparks spat off the concrete inches from her head, but she didn't slow. She hit the ground, rolled, and sprinted into the darkness of the surrounding hills. Behind her, the bunker roared as the charges detonated. The ground trembled, a shockwave ripping through the air, flames geysering into the night sky. The communications hub, the nerve center of the enemy, was gone in an instant, reduced to rubble and fire. The shouts of soldiers turned to chaos, confusion spiraling through their ranks. Sarah didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her mission was complete. The ghosts of her fallen comrades would rest easier now. But the night wasn't done with her. As she crested a ridge, the beam of a spotlight swept across the hillside, catching her silhouette. Machine guns barked, stitching the ground around her with hot lead. She dove into the brush, rolled, and came up firing. The stolen rifle spat flames, cutting down the squad charging her position. She knew more would come. The enemy wouldn't stop hunting her now. But she felt a grim smile tug at her lips as she slipped deeper into the shadows, moving like the storm she had always been. Alone, outnumbered, hunted. But still fighting, still refusing to fall, the night pressed heavier than steel on her shoulders, yet her spirit refused to waver. She crouched in the shadows of the ruined outpost, sweat dampening the back of her neck beneath her stolen gear. The silence was deceptive here, a silence that seemed thick enough to swallow a breath whole, but Alina knew well that every second of that quiet was stitched with hidden threats. She had been a soldier long enough to understand that stillness in a war zone was never peace. It was either a trap laid by cunning hands or the last breath before a storm of chaos. Her muscles coiled with the tension of anticipation as she adjusted the enemy's harness she still wore, making sure the clasps were tight. She needed every advantage to move unseen among those who hunted her. The enemy camp still sprawled ahead, its floodlights piercing upward like accusing fingers at the night sky. Inside its walls, chaos brewed. Her sabotage had not gone unnoticed. Fires from the detonated fuel dumps still crackled in the distance, lighting the clouds with an ominous red glow. Soldiers ran in tight formations, shouts cutting through the air as officers barked frantic orders. Somewhere deep inside she knew she had shaken them hard but not enough to break them. This was only the middle of the game, and survival meant pushing deeper, forcing them to bleed not only resources but fear. She inhaled slowly, eyes narrowing as her mind calculated every step forward. Moving like a shadow, she slithered toward the fence line, her gloved fingers brushing the rough wire mesh. The perimeter was crawling with patrols, but their focus was fractured, pulled between stamping out fires, checking stores, and securing officers. That fracture was her window. Timing her breath with the steps of the nearest patrol, she rolled beneath a broken panel of wire, sliding across the dirt like water slipping under a door. Her chest pressed flat against the ground, her heartbeat a low drum echoing in her ears. She froze as the boots of two guards came within inches of her head. Their voices drifted low, muttering in their tongue, one of them spitting angrily into the dust before they turned away. She waited 5 long seconds more, the air tight in her lungs, then slid forward into the cover of stacked crates. From here she could see into the camp's inner sector. It was worse than she expected. Armored vehicles lined up, heavy weapons being prepped, drones charging at makeshift stations. They were regrouping faster than she had imagined. If she didn't cut deeper into their operations, her earlier strike would mean nothing but a delay. Her mission demanded disruption on a scale that would leave this camp crippled beyond recovery. But fate had a cruel way of testing resolve. As she moved from one shadow to the next, ducking low and weaving between cover, she heard the sharp, guttural whistle of an alarm. Her gut twisted instantly. Someone had spotted something, or worse, someone had found the guard she left unconscious in the Trillion hours ago. The camp erupted in motion, soldiers scattering lights, sweeping in broad arcs. She clenched her jaw, her body tensing to vanish deeper into the maze of chaos, when a sudden hand clamped around her ankle. Instinct took over. She spun, blade flashing in her hand, slicing across the darkness. A grunt of pain followed as the enemy soldier stumbled back, clutching his arm, his shout piercing the night like a flare. No more silence now. She launched forward, elbow smashing into his jaw, finishing him with a ruthless efficiency she had honed through years of surviving where others fell. The soldier collapsed, but the sound had already traveled. Lights converged, shouts rose louder. Her breathing sharpened as adrenaline surged like fire through her veins. There was no chance of stealth now, only speed, deception, and the brutality of force. She grabbed the fallen soldier's rifle, checked the chamber with a flick of her thumb, and sprinted into the maze of tents. Shots cracked behind her, tearing into canvas, sending sparks from metal poles. She ducked, weaving between obstacles, her mind reading the layout as if the ground itself whispered directions. She dived into a supply tent, slashing open crates, spilling ammunition and rations across the floor in deliberate chaos. Soldiers would stumble here, wasting precious seconds on the clutter. She moved again, dropping a grenade behind her as she tore out the other side. The explosion rippled through the night, fire swallowing the tent, screams ripping through the camp. Fear. Confusion. That was her real weapon now. She darted into the command sector, heart pounding as she spotted the largest tent, banners draped in the enemy's insignia. She slid behind it, tearing open a flap with her blade. Inside, officers scrambled over maps and radio equipment, their faces pale under the sudden urgency of alarms. Without hesitation, she threw herself into the storm. A flashbang rolled across the ground, exploding in a burst of white light. Chaos erupted, officers screaming as blindness stole their sight. She was already moving, sweeping across the table, scattering maps, ripping cords from radios, smashing headsets under her boots. A colonel staggered toward her, fury in his blinded eyes. She caught his wrist mid-swing, twisted, and drove her knife hilt into his throat. He collapsed gasping, his voice forever silenced. She knew she couldn't stay. Reinforcements were seconds away. Her hands moved fast, planting a series of charges beneath the main communications hub. As she sprinted out the back, the detonators blinked red, ready to erase their command's voice in fire. She didn't look back when the blast came. She didn't need to. The roar of destruction, the crumple of steel, and the shockwave of burning air told her the job was done. She dove behind an overturned vehicle, panting, sweat streaking through the dirt on her face. For a moment, she allowed herself a single breath of grim satisfaction. The heart of their operation was in ruins. Orders could no longer flow like a steady stream. They would be fractured, disconnected, fighting as scattered pieces instead of a sharpened blade. Yet she knew the night was far from over. The enemy was resilient, and rage could drive them harder than discipline. She needed to vanish again, melt into the dark before their fury closed around her. She crawled toward the camp's northern wall, low and silent, her every movement deliberate. Beyond that wall stretched the jagged forest, the only cover left. But her escape was not as clean as she had hoped. As she climbed the last ridge of dirt before the fence, a spotlight caught her in its beam. Time froze. The shouts that followed were deafening, rifles snapping to their shoulders, a dozen muzzles flaring fire into the night. Bullets hissed past her head, shredding the air, tearing chunks from the earth at her feet. She rolled, pushing her body beyond exhaustion, weaving in desperate arcs until she slammed against the fence. Her knife flashed again, sawing through wire as rounds ricocheted around her. Pain lanced across her shoulder as one bullet grazed flesh, hot blood soaking her sleeve. She didn't cry out. Pain was an old companion. She gritted her teeth, ripping open the last strand of wire, and threw herself through the gap. A grenade clinked against the dirt where she had been seconds before. The explosion hurled her forward, slamming her against the tree line. Her ears rang, her vision blurred, but her body obeyed her will. She crawled deeper into the woods, every muscle screaming, every breath of fire in her chest. When she finally collapsed in the shelter of ancient roots, Her body trembling, she allowed her eyes to close for one fleeting moment. Her mission was not yet complete, but she had cracked the spine of their strength tonight. She had lived where death had been certain, carved fear into the hearts of men who thought themselves untouchable. Her shoulder burned, her ribs ached, but inside her chest, her heart still thundered with unbroken resolve. She was not done. She would never be done until the storm was finished. The jungle was not silent that night. It pulsed with life, sounds layered atop one another, the clicking of insects, the hiss of hidden reptiles, the mournful call of a nocturnal bird. Yet through all that natural noise, Adriana's mind filtered only one thing: the sound of human movement. She crouched behind the thick roots of a kapok tree, listening. The enemy patrol was close, too close. Their boots pressed the damp earth with that deliberate heaviness trained soldiers never lost. A faint clink of gear, the metallic rasp of a rifle strap adjusting. She caught all of it. She pressed her lips together and steadied her breathing, knowing the slightest mistake could undo the days of work she had invested to reach this point. The mission wasn't finished, not yet, and until it was she had no luxury of rest. Adriana's body was still healing from the free fall and the crash into the canopy. Every muscle ached from climbing, crawling, and constant vigilance. She had bandaged her bruises with scavenged fabric and cleaned her wounds with rainwater, but infection loomed in the shadows of every hour. And yet, none of it mattered. Pain was just another variable. Fear was just another distraction. What mattered was that she carried with her the codes, the knowledge, and the means to dismantle the network she had infiltrated for over a year. It was bigger than one failed parachute or one injured soldier. It was about crippling a syndicate that funded terror, that destabilized governments, that left countless civilians as collateral damage. And now, here in this suffocating jungle, it would be either her or them. The patrol passed within 20 feet of her hiding place. She could see the faint shimmer of their night vision goggles as they scanned the underbrush, sweeping their rifles deliberately. She counted 4 of them, each moving with practiced discipline. These weren't low-level grunts. They were trained, likely mercenaries bought with the blood money she had traced to this compound. Adriana's fingers brushed the hilt of her combat knife. She could strike, but not yet. Timing was everything, and killing them now would be satisfying but loud, and noise would draw more. She stayed stone still, only moving her eyes, her breath shallow. The leader muttered something in a dialect she recognized, orders to keep moving toward the river. Then just as quickly as they had.